Long Island's Nassau Coliseum, which I've been going to for wrestling shows as far back as I can remember, and has hosted some big WWE events over the past few decades, has been shut down indefinitely. The closure is being blamed on COVID, but the reality is the arena was already $100 million in debt. So I guess you could say it was already sick and on life support, and COVID just came along and pulled the plug on the machine. The virus and the lack of revenue from no events, that really is what seems to have dealt the potentially fatal blow. We don't know yet for sure. According to a story on Bloomberg.com, the Russian billionaire that operates the venue under a lease from Nassau County is shutting it down. While he is seeking investors to take over operations, he's seeking investors to assume the remaining $100 million debt on the building. He could also end up surrendering the lease to its lenders. This all remains to be seen. But here's the quote: "The unforeseeable and unprecedented COVID crisis has had a devastating effect on the operations of the Coliseum and its finances. While we still believe in the enormous long-term economic value of the Coliseum and the development of the surrounding land, we recognize such value will be best realized by other parties." So there is always the chance that, they could end up finding some other investor and it can be resuscitated in the next few years. But there's also the chance that this could be the end for the Nassau Coliseum. It is not the first time that the Coliseum has been closed. About 5 years ago, it closed for about 2 years. That was for renovations. They pumped almost $200 million worth of renovations into that building. And now you look at it you can look it up on the arena website even. The exterior now of the building, it looks like a giant slinky. It didn't always look like that. It only looks like that because of the renovations they did. I guess that's the more modern look that they're going for. It does. It looks like a giant slinky. I would have to think with all the money they pumped into those renovations that it will reopen at some point. But you never know. They are trying to redevelop the area around the Coliseum with the hopes that that will bring more traffic to the building. But if that redevelopment project, which is on hold right now, if that falls through, it could spell doom for the Nassau Coliseum. Now, Nassau was never known, and you've heard me talk about this before, and I know because I've been to this building. Nassau Coliseum is not known for the greatest crowd reactions. Now, it's not as bad as Corpus Christi, but it's not much better. And one of the more famous moments in that building, and I happened to be in the building that night for it, I was at that Raw where he did this, was when Paul Heyman, who was nearing the end of his run as a commentator on Raw. This was only a few weeks before he got bounced out of the announce position and Jerry Lawler came back to the company. It was in November of 2001. During one of the commercial breaks, this did not air on TV. This happened during a commercial break when they were dark in the building. Well, not dark. The lights were on, but they were not on TV. And in the middle of the show, Paul Heyman stands up from the announce desk. He does this on his own. To the best of my knowledge, he was not told to do this. He did this on his own. I guess as a New Yorker, a native New Yorker, he was very upset by the lack of crowd reaction on this show. He gets up, he grabs the house mic, he walks halfway up the ring steps, and then looks out into the crowd. He looks out at all of us. He actually looked out right, like on the side of the building that I was on. The stage and the ramp and everything was to my left. He looked out at our side of the building and he said, "This crowd is the worst audience that we have ever performed in front of." And then he, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he made another comment about how they should never ever tape another television show here ever again. And he got great heat for it, and I get that he was a heel at the time, although he wasn't a manager. He wasn't really like an in-ring performer. But he meant what he said. This was not just to get heat like as a heel. He meant what he said. And the people were not happy about that. And I will say, from what I can remember, the crowd that night was pretty bad. It was a Nassau crowd. I'd have to go back and take a look. I think that was the night that Rock beat Chris Jericho in the main event to win the WCW title. I don't remember much about the rest of the show. I don't know if it was a bad show or not. But anyway, it can be like pulling teeth in that building sometimes to get a reaction. But I can't ever remember a situation like that before, where the announcer, in the middle of the show, gets on the mic and just completely shits on the audience the way that Paul Heyman did that night. But, I mean, my earliest memory from Nassau Coliseum, I mean, I was going to shows in Jersey, at the Meadowlands and Madison Square Garden going back to, 1987 was probably the first show I ever went to. But my earliest memory from Nassau was a show, and I looked it up. I knew that there was an Ultimate Warrior Papa Shango match. And I knew some of the matches on the card, and I was able to figure out which one it was. It was May 1st, 1992. I was at that show. It was a live event at Nassau Coliseum. We got the Ultimate Warrior against Papa Shango. And we got Bret Hart defending the Intercontinental Championship against Shawn Michaels. So that was my first Bret Hart-Shawn Michaels match. And the main event of the show was not the Ultimate Warrior, actually. The main event of the show was LOD beating the Beverly Brothers. I do have vague memories of this. The rest of the card I have no memory of. But that's how far back I can remember going as far as Nassau. I can remember winning tickets. I won tickets. I mean, I still don't know how I did this. I won tickets 8 different times from the local radio station here in New York between 1998 and 1999. 8 times. And this was one of those things where you had to call in and get it just right. Like, you didn't have to call in and be the first caller or be, answer a trivia question. I think pretty much most or all of them was you had to be caller 95 because it was 95.5 WPLJ at the time. And then a few months ago, I think the station went out. It got taken over. Now it's like a Christian radio station or something. But that was one of the big radio stations in New York at the time. And you'd have to be caller 95 or caller 28 or something. And I had a system. We had 2 phones in the apartment, 2 landline phones. And for some of them, I did it on my own. For others, I told my brother, I said, hey, come here. I said, you're going to go on the other phone, go on the other line. I'm going to go on this one. We're both going to call at the same time. If you get through, you hand the phone to me. And then we would go to work. And I managed to get through 8 different times. First it was Raw. A few months later, it was Raw at the Nassau Coliseum. It was like my little belated birthday gift to myself in October of 98. And that was a big show because that was the night that Steve Austin poured cement, or as Jim Ross said, cement, in Vince McMahon's Corvette. That was the night that the Blue Blazer returned for the first time in a decade. And we all know how that turned out. But that night at Nassau was the Blue Blazers' first appearance since, 1988, 1989. And it was also the return of the Big Boss Man to the company as one of Vince McMahon's henchmen. At the end of the show, he was dressed up like a member of the Shield. Big Boss Man was the original member of the Shield. He's the founding father of the Shield. I have a lot of memories, though. I do have a lot of memories of being there. There are other events that have taken place at Nassau Coliseum that maybe aren't so wonderful. For example, Vince Russo won the WCW championship from Booker T on Nitro in a cage match at the Nassau Coliseum, which for Russo I'm sure was a big deal because he's a New Yorker and he got to win the championship in New York. But that's a memory I'd rather forget. Droz, he wrestled his final match at the Nassau Coliseum. That was the night that he was paralyzed in the match with D'Lo Brown. Thankfully, I was not there to see that. One of the greatest SummerSlams of all time, SummerSlam 2002, is at Nassau Coliseum. The final WWE branded, or it might have been it was maybe only how many of them did they even do? I don't remember how many Great American Bash shows WWE did. They probably did about 4 or 5 of them, I'm guessing. But the final Great American Bash that they ever did was at Nassau Coliseum in 2008. Then it just became The Bash. It was no longer the Great American Bash. Now it's just The Bash. Fatal 4-Way, the one and only Fatal 4-Way pay-per-view they ever did. I was there for that. I wish I wasn't. And Evolution, the one and only women's only pay-per-view they did a couple of years ago, which was actually, I thought, an excellent show, was at the Nassau Coliseum. So anyway, those are some of my memories. I thought, lighten the mood a little bit and talk a little bit about that. Hopefully we'll find a way to have a resurgence, but it's not looking too good. It's not looking too good for the Nassau Coliseum.